What's going on?
What's up?
This is Tyler.
And this is Jesse.
And this is the Hollywood is Dead podcast.
Yes.
Yes, it is. Today, we have Peter Zahos.
Dr. Peter Zahos. Oh, Jesus Christ.
I'm an idiot. I'm sorry, doctor. I just feel like he's a friend of Archetype Pictures. So
yeah, well, it's like I said, I think with Darren, it's
Yeah.
yeah. See,
See?
That feels gross. No, because I work in the medical field, and
Yeah.
I work underneath doctors, so it's just like anytime there is a doctor in the room and I'm not addressing you that way, it's just respect, and I'm just very uncomfortable.
well, and the nice thing, these aren't pretentious people.
Oh no, he's
So
Dr. Wolf and Dr. Zahos
Yes.
are not pretentious at all. It's just a trade thing.
yeah, exactly. And Dr. Zahos is a friend of Archetype Pictures. He and our founder Michael Ryan go way back. So
They wear friendship bracelets.
They wear. Michael showed me the socks that Peter gave him for Christmas one year.
He
said
knitted them.
besties.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
They were hand knitted.
hand knitted. Yes.
Okay, I'm taking several liberties here.
This is a little preview of how much fun we had on the podcast today. So
Always have fun.
we always have fun. Dr. Zahos is a brain surgeon. He's an author and a podcaster.
Mm-hmm.
He has a graphic novel out there, which is called The Adjacent. You can find it on Comixology, and you can get the whole thing. It's like 88 pages of very well-produced content. So it's a great story. He's also got a podcast on Apple Podcasts, The Life Medical.
It's really good.
It's really good. It's really good. It took a left turn with COVID, but he was able to
Understandably.
Yeah, it was. It's still a very compelling story. So he gets to follow doctors as they navigate, hospitals during COVID. That is pretty intense. It gets a little emotional in spots, so might tug at your heartstrings a little bit. But we cover some good ground in this.
It was a good one.
Yeah.
It was really fun.
Yeah. So I think you guys will enjoy it. All right? You good?
I'm good.
I'm good. Enjoy the episode. Yeah, thank you so much, Peter, for coming on the podcast. You are connected to Archetype Pictures in a couple different ways, but we're going to get to some of that. You are a brain surgeon, which I think Jesse might find really interesting.
Oh, yeah.
So. She's our...
We'll be getting to craniotomes and bone saws, I'm sure, within the next about 4 minutes.
That's just who I am now.
Yes. Yeah. So I think, I want to start out, maybe this is kind of becoming a little bit of a theme for the podcast, just trying to get a feel for who you are and how did you, this is an interesting thing. So you're a brain surgeon, but you're also an author and a podcaster. So which came first, the author or the brain surgeon?
Well, you might be surprised that it's probably the brain surgeon that came first, though.
I didn't find that.
Early in my career, and now we're looking at college, I was part of the newspaper and magazine, and was pretty enthusiastic about that. And almost immediately afterwards, I took this left turn to medical school, and took me about 25 years to get kind of back to that. So it's been kind of a long and winding road, but the brain surgeon day job, you have to put your time in, so it's something that I couldn't be starting that late. I think you get too tired. You got to do it when you have enough energy and investigative curiosity and and stamina and all the things that you need, to get it going. But even during that course, I began to think about the story that became the adjacent, which we'll be talking about.
Yes.
So everything kind of melds into each other. And then more recently, I've been lucky enough, like you folks, to have the tools available to put a podcast out. So you and I and 2 million other people are all doing that.
Yes,
you know?
I know. I know. I always felt like, do I start one now? Like everybody has one of these things.
Yeah.
But I think honestly, I did listen to yours. It's very well produced.
I did too. Yeah.
It's
Thank you.
It's something that I think a lot of people will find interesting, especially nowadays where, we kind of live in this world where it's kind of a little bit bifurcated, where you have people that really trust doctors and some that don't.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the more we let people in on what's going on, and maybe it'll help bridge that gap a little bit. So yeah, definitely
I would hope. I mean, I definitely hope so. I mean, the podcast is called The Life Medical, and I've had an interest for many years in sort of medical documentary series. A number of years ago, we put together a little pilot for a brain surgery documentary at one of the most prestigious places in the country, with maybe kind of the preeminent neurosurgeon in the U.S. of the last 25 years. It really was a good project. It looked good. We were going to be following residents. It was going to have a lot of the zip and pizzazz of like a fictional show, but this was like 2009, so there wasn't as many outlets. Like right now, it just seems like there's unlimited appetite for content. But back then, you had two or three networks, and we just didn't sell it. I wish we had, because I think it would have been great. But I've always been interested in this, and it was really the pandemic and looking and seeing doctors and nurses on screens, for the first time in a regular way. Like we've been doing this job, since time immemorial in one way or the other, but we're kind of there. You kind of expect us to do our job, and we do it. We're not looking for anything more than that. But all of a sudden, doctors and nurses were prized in a way that I thought was really very heartening. But at the same time, the stresses of the pandemic have really worn on many medical professionals, and I just thought being able to get those stories out, and certainly there's a COVID angle to many of the things that we've talked about, but even as we look at getting into a different type of world where there's so many of these medical stories are compelling in and of itself, and I just love hearing people tell tell those stories. So we're hoping that we can do more and more of that. So I really appreciate that you listened to it, and you thought it you thought it was good, and we're trying to make it like a narrative, so that it is a story rather than just two people talking about high level arcane kind of language that is going to be hard to get at.
Yeah.
Right.
Most of that would be way over my head. No, I thought, it was definitely very, very interesting. Well produced. It's like an NPR, produced podcast. It's really nice.
Yeah. No, thanks.
Yeah.
We'll keep plugging at it. You know how it is. This is the kind of thing that it takes effort to put this stuff together, no matter what you're doing. And for if you're doing it more frequently, that's a lot of work. I know you guys are pretty consistent in what you're putting out there, and I don't know. That takes a lot out of you. I think.
Trying to be, yeah. And now we added in the video stuff, and I was telling Jesse when we were starting to do that, I was like, I just want to do one camera, but then I ended up having to add another camera because the webcam on the laptop would not be able to get both of us, so I was like, all right, I got to figure this out. And it just adds a whole nother level to it. But to me, it's worth it. It's less about, I'm not doing this where both of us aren't really doing this necessarily to get a ton of listens. It's to be able to talk to cool people and to meet inquiring minds and especially the ones that are, part of what we're trying to do with the podcast is be that intermediary between people who are pursuing their dreams and the ones who have now come back from doing that with the knowledge to be able to pass down to us, to help us on our journey. And, it's something that's really cool. It's why I find it really interesting that you chose to go the path of being a brain surgeon, even though you grew up with an interest in storytelling. And I mean, I guess, why not just jump into being a storyteller? What did you feel? Was there any familiar pressures to become a brain surgeon, or what led you there?
No pressures at all. I mean, my dad went to night school at City College. He sold life insurance. He was the first in his family to go to college, so it wasn't like there was this great pressure or pedigree to go right and be a doctor or a lawyer. Though right. I have a brother who's a lawyer and I'm a doctor, so it's the kind of that classic second generation immigrant story. We try to do a little bit better, or at least strive a little higher. But my origin story, as it were, for being a brain surgeon is sort of ghastly in a way when I describe it, because my mother told me when I was 8 years old, and I think they were having a party in the apartment, and I just kind of burst in, and I just very, very straightforwardly said, I want to be a brain surgeon in my pajamas, 8 years old. And then I turned around and I went back to my bedroom. And my mother would tell this story, and I'm like, that is a absolutely absurd story. Like, how did that happen? What was I wearing? What was the weather? What was the color of the car? It was always consistent. It always was the same. Yeah. So how in the world did that come into my head? I have no idea. But, it seems like it got in early and it never left. So that impulse, I think, was probably, the strongest one that, that moved me along. But during that time, the time as you get more mature and you start to read and get interested in other aspects of life. The storytelling part of it always exists. And even in practice of medicine, that is a story to be told. You're always sitting with patients, being able to get out of them their story and the pertinent stuff, and even some of the stuff that's perhaps not exactly on target, but can help kind of fill out the picture. That's a skill that takes a lot of time, but it's the same type of inquiry, the same type of curiosity about somebody that that is the same as a fiction writer, or a storyteller, or a journalist, or a movie maker, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense, and it's kind of in line with what the adjacent is dealing with as well. That's such I don't want to give much of it away, because I want people to go to Amazon and check it out for themselves. But can you give us a little
plug? Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, it certainly deserves it. You put a lot of work into it. It looks really good. It plays really well. And it is a really great read. So I hope there's going to be many, many more. But what was the impetus for the adjacent? So do you want to give a little background on that?
Sure. So the adjacent is a story of a neurosurgeon who figures out a way to travel between alternate worlds, alternate histories. And she does so by having this insight in the early part of her career. And she's treating patients who have dissociative identity disorder. That's sort of classic multiple personality, very celebrated in stage and screen. And I think that the more recent diagnosis is now termed as DID, but essentially people who can inhabit or express these different personalities or these different identities. And she finds that there's a group of patients that are sharing a common reality. They're doing sort of outsider art, where they're doing these very detailed maps and images, and these images seem to correlate one to the other. And so she begins to believe that they're actually perceiving this alternate world, and the perception of that world is what gets them off kilter in ours. They can't kind of handle all the different sensory input. So like a good doctor, she figures out a way to quote unquote cure them. And she does that by using a technique called deep brain stimulation. And the reason that was the pathway is, number one, that's something that I've done in my practice. It's a way to treat Parkinson's disease or essential tremor, some movement disorders, and it's putting an electrode in a very specific part of the brain and being able to interfere with the circuitry so that an excitatory circuit is somewhat damped down, so perhaps you can reduce a tremor, for example. We've been doing this now for like 15, 20 years, and now they're looking at other types of treatments for or other types of diseases that can be treated with directed stimulation. And there's a history in neurosurgery, and it's sort of a dark history of psychosurgery. And I'm talking, of course, about like lobotomies. And there was a period of time where that was the fashion to do those kind of techniques. And it's a part of a chapter in neurosurgery that certainly no one is proud of now, but at the time became like at least in some quarters, became very well utilized, even overutilized. And there are lots of famous stories about that. So there's a history in neurosurgery of trying to treat psychiatric disorders, and I wanted to kind of bring up that darkness, but put it to a different use. So ultimately, and this is all in the comics, so this is not something that is a secret. If you read the comic, you see it.
Yeah.
In the as we're developing the movie with Michael, we're gonna come up with another part of the story, another chapter to the story.
Love it.
But she figures out that there's a way to cure these patients. They sort of collapse to a single reality. But as in good Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde fashion, she can't help herself. She has to experiment on herself and figure out a way to travel to these worlds. And once she does that, the multiverse is not very happy about it. So things start to happen around her. And that's, kind of the beginning of that story. So brain surgery was directly related to my interest in this particular. It's not like I have a lot of ideas, but the couple ideas I have, I try to stick with it.
Yeah. No, it is fascinating. I was wondering about that because, I have a very rudimentary entry-level interest in string theory and the multiverse, and I would be lying if I didn't admit that I wanted to try and figure out a way to make stories that that involved those things because they're so complex, but I gave up. So I'm glad there's people like you that aren't giving up. It's right in your wheelhouse. You're the guys that should be making that stuff.
And you look around now, it's like, at first there were like Man in the High Castle, the book was, one of my favorite books growing up. And the series is obviously very elaborate and all that.
Yeah.
And then you just begin to now see more, like you can't go anywhere now where you turn to the left, turn to the right, and there's some alternate world or alternate history story out there.
Yeah.
I was just watching the latest episode of Underground Railroad, and that's an alternate history that, again, based on a fine book. And we're not even talking about the Marvel Cinematic Universe and their play with multiverse concepts and time travel, or what they're going to do with Spider-Man, or what they're going to do with my pal Doctor Strange in the next movie. It's all multiverse all the time. Too much.
Right. Yeah, it does seem to be everywhere. That's crazy. Yeah, it's pretty wild. So you mentioned briefly that, and I'm aware of this because I talk to Michael daily, and I've read the script that he's working on right now. So far the first 29 pages, and I'm stoked. I'm really stoked. Yeah, it's coming along.
Yeah, Michael and I we spoke the other day, and we're like, we can't reveal too much about it, and we shouldn't.
No.
because it's still in that process. But there are enough hints in the comic to kind of tell you where we want to go, or at least where we want to end up, with the story. But yeah, Michael loves all these, like anything I throw at him, he can volley pretty well, So when I talk about some esoteric bit of Gnostic religion, he's like, "Oh yeah, I've read all those books."
I know.
But the quantum physics stuff is particularly funny because, like, for me, the story is based on my, I think, pretty good understanding of like basic neuroscience and applied neurosurgery, and that's what I do. And my misunderstanding of much of the quantum physics concepts. I don't think Michael has a misunderstanding of those things. I think he's very deep into it. So he's helping me out on that front.
Yeah, he's got a pretty wicked mind. So I find it really interesting talking to him. And, we just interviewed Lee McCloskey. And it's like,
what
wow.
a fascinating cat that he is.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Just insane. I cannot wait to see, his place in person. It's just amazing. But, it's,
did you have a video where you saw the background and saw some of the murals and things?
Yes. So he gave us a tour of his house, or I'm sorry, of the library. And, it was just amazing the things that came through. Even in his, little webcam.
Yeah.
It was just it was incredible. It's one of those things.
I was lucky enough to have a visit. This is well over I think it was like 12 years ago. And so obviously the work was in an earlier stage than it is now because he continues to add to it. But I couldn't believe what I was looking at.
Yeah.
Right.
The depth of it and that on every surface there's some representation of this fascinating worldview. And I don't do it justice, but I'd love to hear that interview. It's really inspiring.
It really is. Michael made, I don't know if you've seen this, Michael made a short little experimental documentary at Lee's place there, and you see him tearing up the carpet, and just painting directly onto the linoleum that was underneath it.
So cool.
It's just
amazing.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's really crazy.
It's like he had to do it. Yeah, Michael said he was going to send that because I'd love to see that. I didn't know that existed, but I'd love to see it.
Yeah. I think it's up on Vimeo. I'll link it.
I linked it.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So in the show notes of the episode, we actually just released it. So in the show notes there's a Vimeo link. So yeah, be sure to check that out.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, you have a history also of talking to doctors who try to work out these outlandish theories by using their knowledge. I really liked Darren Wolf's interview on the most likely zombie plagues and
it was so much fun.
Brian, that's a guy that's thought it through.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Big Darren Wolf fans over here.
Yeah. I was, so speaking of Darren Wolf, I was thinking this would be perfect for you as well. You need to start a TikTok. It would help so much with advertising. It's amazing how many people flock to his TikTok videos.
Yeah.
It's kind of insane.
Well, he's a fantastic teacher. Like he makes very complex information very easy to digest. So I mean, his TikToks do very well.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And I guarantee
I think that's I haven't seen any of that, but I don't. I have to embrace the world of TikTok. It seems like one of the smartest ways one way to get to people.
It is okay. Yeah. So my one piece of advice, and I'm pretty sure that I'm taking this from Gary Vaynerchuk. So he says, well, he doesn't say this, but this is what I've come to. Avoid all videos of people dancing and all that stuff, and follow, Darren Wolf. When Peter gets his TikTok, follow Peter. Follow podcasts that you really like. Follow people that you want to learn something from, and
it should help your algorithms to get rid of the dancing too.
I
don't have anything against anybody dancing, but I'm just like, I'm so over just like that situation.
it's pretty mind numbing. So yeah,
Sure.
It's
it's a rabbit hole that you may not ever get out of if you keep following it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think when it's used correctly, it's actually a valuable tool because it's such a quick way of connecting with people. And ultimately that's what we want to do, you know, is to be able to connect with people. So for me, I just post little snippets of podcasts that we've done.
Which I thought was cool. That was a good way to kind of get like, you know, a nice highlight from a conversation that's actually a lot deeper than even just that part. And then somebody's able to come find, you know, the full thing. So that's cool.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, you know, all those channels you can use for that. You pick either something provocative, compelling, or, you know, whether in or out of context, but it's enough to hook those that you might not come and listen to you just up front based on, you know, the titles of our podcasts or what category we're in. So yeah, I think that's a great way to do it. You just got to be so creative.
Yeah, that's truly the key. And when you have something that's unique, such as what you're doing, I think it could be a big hit. So I would certainly suggest, you know, checking that out. But,
I'm with you. It's good advice. I appreciate that, man.
Absolutely. I don't want to get too far away from the topic of the podcast. So this is not a how to promote yourself sort of podcast, but
no.
Yeah, right.
I think I want to get into what's some advice or something that you've learned on your path of creating the graphic novel that maybe some, you know, other people should pay attention to.
Well, I'll tell you, unless you have the skills, you know, I'm not an artist, so I couldn't draw it. So you have to engage people that are professionals. And that was my, you know, initially just putting together the team to do the art, to do the pencils, to do the color, to do the lettering.
Yeah.
That's you know, I mean, I've been a comic book fan since I was a little kid, and went through the classic comic book trauma of your mother throwing out all your like great vintage comics because we're just clearing the closet.
No.
You come back from school. What happened? And sadly, my father went through the same thing, and I think, you know, probably at that time he had Action #1 that went down the incinerator in Queens, and you know, I'm still traumatized by the thought of it.
Oh my
But
gosh.
when you read these comics, you're like, well, this, you know, seems like it's manageable, but to actually put all that together does take a lot of effort, and you become your own editor. So number one, I would say, is don't be shy about asking for help.
Yeah.
You know, again, whether it's you know, people to help you kind of flesh out the story. You know, I went through a lot of different versions of this story. The first version was kind of the most accessible to me, where the hero or the protagonist was, you know, the character of Nick, who basically based on me. So it was like, well, I'll be the neurosurgeon that travels to these worlds. And then I realized it's number one, that wasn't as interesting. Number two, it's more fun to be the villain. And number three, that I could make a much more fully fleshed out, you know, badass, you know, female protagonist. And it kind of opened up aspects of the story that I didn't know. But I needed other people to kind of help me do that, because I didn't really see it. I was on you know, I probably had a more narrow view of it. So being able to bounce your ideas off writers, or, you know, again, you know, this is much to your, you know, the wheelhouse of your podcast, to other storytellers, whether they've worked in TV or whether they've worked in movies or they've written things on their own or even nonfiction, but, you know, knowing how to craft a tale.
Yeah.
That was invaluable, because I had to go through that process just to kind of recalibrate the story, to understand who the characters were, and then from that point, having the story, then being able to develop a script, and then adding the layers of the art and all those things that I had no idea how to do, but had to get the right people to do it.
Yeah.
So all I would say is, it took a few years, and I don't know if I'd recommend it, especially when you go through some of the artists who are, I guess, just legendarily known to blow deadlines, or they kind of drop the project, or they have their own things that they're more that when other jobs come up, it'll be a lot more compelling than a novice graphic novelist trying to corral all these people. So there are a lot of fits and starts to that. You got to be. So I guess number 2 is you just have to be kind and patient to yourself, because nothing's going to work at the time that and the pace that you wish or you think that you do. This took, literally from kind of putting it together to publication in 2019, it took 7 years. So again, at that point, my day job, probably didn't help either. So, a lot of it had to be done on off hours and all that sort of stuff. But it's not, all these things take lots of time, unless you really have done it a few times before and you got a system and all that kind of works. So, the third thing I guess I would say is you got to embrace that journey and not feel beat up by it. You have to kind of be invigorated by it, because at the end, when you have something concrete that you can hold in your hand, or that you can, also have on Comixology in a digital form that you can look at, in the setting of a comic book, it's pretty satisfying. And if other people read it and like it, doesn't matter how many people they are, that's gonna be a very, very satisfying thing to do. A very satisfying end product. Yeah. So all those things I guess will kind of swirl in my head when I'm trying to answer the question. How did you do it, and what lessons have you learned from it?
Yeah. Did you actually deal with flaky artists?
Sure. Well, are there any other kind?
Like
these guys were very good. They were mostly, on the artist side, they were all men. So I'm saying guys in a generic, but that was the way. Yeah. But they were all, they all had Marvel or DC experience or had prior gigs. So, these weren't, neophytes. So, and a couple of them, names to be mentioned, were sort of known as those that always blow through a deadline, or just get lost, or you're like, hello,
did you get my email?
Or yes, it was amazing how sometimes you just kind of lose track, and then they kind of come back. But sometimes their own projects, once their own projects were perhaps taking fire, they would. They would gracefully bow out and all. So I went through a few artists. The first half of the book has like 4 different artists. And then I settled for the second half with a team that, I really liked the style of it. It's kind of a retro image comics of the 80s and 90s kind of style that I grew up with and kind of like. But I didn't hit that out of the gate. It took a few tries to do so. But that's the nature of the biz, from what I'm told.
Oh my God. Yeah. It's, even on Interpreters, the film that we released last year. Sorry, I'm slurring on my words. We hired 2 different artists, and eventually
for storyboard.
No, we hired one for storyboard, but we, for actual, rendering of the Interpreter, which was really intense. And it, basically out of 2 of them, all we got was a very mediocre model that Michael ended up refining himself, and it took like another 8 months to be able to, put that thing together. And it's like, we are, kind of what we were under the impression of is that you have, time, money, and quality. It's like, if you don't have a lot of money, you got time, but if you go too fast, your quality is going to suffer. So, it's just, we didn't have money, so we had to take our time in order to get the highest quality that we could.
The classic equation.
Yeah. And it's just not easy. You really got to be doing it for the love of it. And like what you said, to be able to hold it in your hands. And that's one thing I am fascinated about. And which has kind of interested me in potentially writing some stuff, is that, you know, a book can live forever, you know, especially nowadays with the internet, or, you know, just to be able to see it on your bookcase would be really, really cool. It's a nice legacy.
Yeah. And the fact is, there's no substitute for going through that process and doing it. You know, so if you have, you know, if there's an idea that's really taken hold, getting it out in that form, like a comic, even though, again, you've got to bring a number of people to bear, but it can be done. And there's a lot to be said for that as a great roadmap to a movie or a TV, version of it, if that's the way you want to go.
Yeah.
But, you know, or if you're, you know, writing a fictional piece and it's just getting that book out there, there's so many ways that you can get your work out and distribute it or publish it. Like, you know, Andy Weir wrote the Martian, didn't he? I think initially was giving it out for free.
Oh, wow.
To get, he just wanted it out there, and then it became, you know, such a incredible hit. And then got a deal, and it was a very interesting way. You got a book deal after that. But by that point, people were just very enthusiastic about the project. So there's so many ways of making that dream happen.
Yeah.
And hopefully, if you do it a couple times, then you have a core of people, like, you know, like-minded artists, or your community, like, you know, what you're building with Archetype, that, you know, you'll be able to rely on time and time again, right?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, especially for indie filmmakers, you know, you have to have a solid team, you know, that you can trust and rely on. And that's the only way we were able to make the movie that we made, was having a team that we all trusted. You know, we all pushed each other to the absolute brink, but, you know, it was so important. So very, very important. And, you know, something Lee was talking about too is, you know, the act of creating itself, you know, creates more opportunities, you know, and I think that's just so very true. A lot of us have ideas that just kind of fester in us, and we get so frustrated because something's holding us back from actually going out and creating it. And in today's day and age, I don't think there's much of an excuse to sit on an idea for too long.
Right.
You know, if you think it costs too much money, if the idea is too big, you know, scale it down and you know, make it into a comic book for now. You know, it's like,
right.
That's, you got to get it out. So,
yeah. And by doing that, you know, by giving yourself the gift of time, as you said, right? Because none of us have unlimited resources, or whether financial or artistic, to you know, like, get a number of people working on this, you know, day and night, and getting it out. So if it takes longer, that allows you also to kind of control it. You know, that it is your thing. You're not waiting for someone else to go, "Hey, kid, that's a great idea. Let me fund this, or why don't you do it this way, or let me give you some notes early on." You know,
exactly. Yeah.
You know, who needs that? If you know how you want to do it, there's so many lower barriers of entry, whether it's a podcast or a comic, or, you know, again, you know, putting out a manuscript in any kind of, you know, self-publishing format and all that. There are many ways of making it happen. And you're right, there really isn't an excuse.
Yeah.
You know, you can. We all like to procrastinate or go, "Hey, listen, there's something else to do today."
Yeah.
That's human nature. But, you know, if something's nagging at you in the back of your mind, you really, you know, you owe it to yourself to, you know, to pursue it.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Yep. Or else you might have to go see a brain surgeon at some point, because you're driving yourself crazy.
You know, I'm always available. My favorite. Remember The Far Side? You ever read Gary Larson cartoons?
Yes.
I loved Far Side.
That was the bathroom book, man. That was the bathroom book.
Yeah, exactly. I think it never read his bathroom. But there's one of my favorite cartoons. You see a guy, it's a single panel, and a guy's leaning on a storefront, and he's kind of wearing an apron, he's reading the paper, he's got a cigarette. And the awning says, "Frank's neurosurgery." I don't know what Frank's neurosurgery. $400, the works. So it was like a walk-in neurosurgery thing. I just love the idea. I just love the idea of that kind of, that kind of action. So yeah, neurosurgeon is always available to you, but let's hope that it doesn't come to that. There are other things to do.
Exactly. Yeah. So what are your ideas? Is there evidence of a multiverse? So,
yeah. And again, this is also something that has been nice, with certain people, certain podcasts have really helped explore this topic. But there are a few physicists. There's a guy named Brian Greene who's at Columbia who's written extensively about the multiverse possibility. There's another guy, I think his name is Max Tegmark, that I had read also, that had these beautiful renderings of how bubble universes or different things may have come into being. And again, I'm the wrong guy for this. Because my take on it was, instead of the brilliant Rick and Morty version of the multiverse, which leads very quickly to nihilism, right? It's just like, kill one version, there's always another version there. Everything about that show is so brilliant. I'm sure you guys.
I love it.
It's so good.
It's such a great show. I mean, there's so many creative, novel, off the wall things that are packed into that, that
22 minutes or whatever it is,
than any other show. But their core idea of the multiverse is the logical extension of, well, if everything exists, then what does anything matter? And so that nihilistic strain, which while I totally get, was kind of antithetical to the way I saw this. I wanted to look at it as, if there were a world, if there was a point of divergence, an alternate history to our world, what would that historical point of divergence be, and what would follow from it, and would that world be some world that you'd want to visit? And to my simple-minded notion, it was I wanted to construct a world where, especially over the last 150 years, more things went right than wrong. Because there's a poignancy to that. There's an idea that it's almost like phantom nostalgia, like you're nostalgic for a time that never happened. And we see a lot of that anyway, where history perhaps is blurred. But if you look at it from the standpoint of a fictional world that would have obviously darkness, but also have great appeal, that world would be as real as ours. And so how do you invest that world with that reality? So it's a little bit, again, it's just philosophically a little different than the idea that there's so many versions of the world, none of them particularly matter. It's just a different way. It just, to me, both philosophies are incredibly valid, and both kind of follow from the idea of a near infinite multiverse. But I tried to make a very finite little slice of that multiverse concept in the course of developing the story and thinking about how the world might be built. And it's a lot of fun building that world. But as far as the physicists' stance on the multiverse, I think there's an equal number who believe it is a accurate representation of reality, and those that don't buy that theory at all, and think of and then we'll come up with with equally unprovable versions of reality, and you're kind of scratching your head either way. But there's a lot of creativity there.
Yeah. No, I'm kind of glad that we don't know yet, because personally, I think that the finiteness of this reality that we currently exist in kind of propels people towards goals, towards art, towards asking questions, and I don't know, it just kind of feels very motivating, because and if you're very real with yourself, you understand that all this could be over in about 10 minutes or in a couple seconds from now. And it if that doesn't light a fire under your butt to get things done, I don't know what will. But I find it all very interesting. I'm a big fan of Brian Greene. His stuff is quite interesting.
Yeah. And he's a great popularizer of science too. You know, he has a
good
festival in New
communicator.
York. I can't remember the name of it, but it's, you know, he's one of these guys that is particularly good at getting those concepts out. And that's really important. Like, it's not like, let's be very educational. It's like, let's really be very compelling and captivating. And in the meantime, you are going to learn something.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things, actually, this is my, one of my proudest moments on Twitter was I asked him a question and he responded. So boom. I asked him, I think he was on Sam Harris's podcast talking about consciousness and how, the idea is that, you know, having the chemical balances in our brains, and how we can sense that consciousness, is only alive for as long as this thing is making those chemical balances correct, and you can alter them and change kind of your reality, right? And once the brain stops working at death, I guess the idea that consciousness just kind of, you know, clicks out. I found that really kind of compelling and quite scary, but in a like I just said, very compelling way that propels me towards my goals. Because if that's true, that's pretty crazy that it just ends. I don't know. What's your experience?
But I understand what you're saying. The idea that, you know, it's that our consciousness resides during our lifespan and as a function of our neurochemistry, among other things, you know, as opposed to, well, you know, there's an infinite number of us, and so you can hedge your bets across a number of different realities or identities. You know, that's kind of cold comfort if you can't access those things. I feel like if you could truly perceive another version of yourself, what would that do to you? Would you be able to hold both of those concepts in your head? Would that drive you mad, or somehow, you know, begin to tweak you in a way that you might not be able to, you know, to manage either reality? I think it would be a lot to take in.
Yeah,
is my general clinical instinct on that.
I feel like people that can compartmentalize really well feel like they're going crazy enough already, let alone without like an alternate perception of themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true. There's a book by an Italian author, Luigi Pirandello. It's called 100,000, and it's about a guy who basically spins into a bit of lunacy because his wife points out that from a certain angle, his nose looks a certain way. And he was like, "What are you talking about?" And she's like, "Yeah, I thought you didn't see that already? Like, you didn't recognize that?" He's like, "Well, no." And then he spins into lunacy thinking that for every single person that he's ever encountered has a different perception of him than he has of himself. And he couldn't grasp it. Like, it was just not computing.
Yeah.
And that alone is you know, our brains are funny things where our perceptions are often highly flawed, you know?
Right.
And, you know, that's why I think, you know, if you have a negative thought about yourself, chances are, that's not how everybody else sees it.
It's okay to examine it first too, though.
That's true. Yeah. But I don't know how you reconcile that. So
yeah. And that, I mean, I'm familiar with that author, and he also, that reminds me of someone that I've been influenced by just because of these brilliant short stories, is Borges, Borges, or Argentinian writer. And he had stories, for example, where someone who remembered everything that ever happened to him and what that would do to you, or someone, a character that if he slept in one direction, he could project himself or imagine every landscape, along that pathway, and couldn't sleep because he could visualize things so beautifully. Wow. So the idea of like these perfect memories and what that would do to you, or these particular mental powers, and what the physical or human toll would be on you. This guy could could conceptualize that stuff in a very interesting way.
Wow. Yeah. And see, I love those explorations. It's just things that you don't normally come across. And I really appreciate those types of stories. You know, it's pretty cool.
If I can ask you guys a question, this
Sure.
is something that you might be able to help me with, given from what I understand is your interest, or at least Jesse, your interest in horror, in horror films. If in the course of the story, as the adjacent, as we're developing it, there's a point where the main character, Alexa, has to do some self-surgery to implant the technology that allows her to, begin her travels. And I've had a number of ways to envision kind of how that would work, how she'd be able to do it. Once you get to the brain, you can't feel it, but getting through the skull or the scalp, that's going to hurt. So you'd have to accommodate that. But the question I have for you, and I have some thoughts on it too, but let me throw it out to you first. Are there movies where there are scenes of self-surgery, one way or the other, that have stuck with you? Do you have any favorites? I know you were talking about like Reanimator and things like that, which is, sort of kind of along that path. But are there any movies that come to mind of people performing these procedures in various, creative or ghastly ways that that might be inspiration for me?
I don't actually know of any like that depict like an actual like procedure. And I'm sure there might be that I haven't seen or just I'm not thinking of. The only one I can really think of that leaps immediately to mind, and it's not really a procedure, it's more of like a torture tactic, is Saw. Yeah, so there's that one. I've actually performed surgery on myself, like very minor, much to my doctor's displeasure. But that's
just today, earlier,
no,
right before the show.
So a long time ago, I had like a well, I mean, you would know all about these, but like just like a subcutaneous like cyst. And nothing like major. It's just like, cosmetically they don't look nice. Like mine was relatively like just harmless, just kind of flattened just like on my jaw. So I had it removed. And the person that did the stitches didn't do them very well. So it was like on my jawline. So whenever I would move my jaw, my stitches would pop open. And it was just
too tight.
Yeah, it was just I got good at stitches on my own. So I had kind of like another one start to form, and I went, I don't really want to deal with this. So, I mean, I have all of the materials I need at home. I was sterile. I had a scalpel, so I just lanced it and stitched myself. And
so the lancing, let's dig into that for a second. So the lancing,
unpack that, please.
Right. Yeah. Let's back up. We don't have to, I can understand how one can even be talked through it. The lancing is one thing, but when you're stitching yourself and looking at a mirror, did you find it difficult to adjust your depth and your the way you would throw a stitch based on the fact that you're looking at it in a mirror, in a mirror image?
A little bit,
that's a challenging thing.
Oh yeah,
It's different than stitching directly onto something you're seeing in front of you.
For sure. And I honestly, I think the thing that helped was the fact that I was not numb in any way. So I just
feel where it
I
was.
could kind of feel where things were, and that helped a little bit. I was like, oh, don't do that. So I just kept, just kind of, and it was like 2 stitches really, because it wasn't, it's not like if it was a huge, like I would never do that to myself. It was like this huge area, but in my head, I think at the time, I'm like, you know what? I can do stitches all right. So let's just see, because like the last person that did it wasn't much better than me apparently. So, but looks good.
So I can do this better than them.
You don't just stitch up dead
the
people.
Idea of like
That's good.
suturing yourself. That is a classic movie thing. I mean, I think we've seen plenty of those scenes where people are just, whether it's looking in a mirror or stitching up their arm or whatever, or that scene, and that's always kind of a, viscerally satisfying thing to see, at least in my mind, when you see them do it right. put a good throw a good suture or two.
There's a really good one actually that I was just thinking about, and
You get something for it.
Yeah.
yeah, there's I think it's a recent shark movie with Blake Lively in it, but like,
Oh, yeah.
she's
I
in,
like that movie.
yeah, she's in med
Yeah.
school is like the thing, and she like basically kind of stitches herself up using like her earring.
Oh yeah, wasn't it like
yeah.
Open Sea or something like that?
Yeah,
or-
something like that.
She's stuck on the rock.
Yeah, it would. I
You're
thought
stuck
that
on
was
the rock, the buoy,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and that shark is real.
Yeah.
That was a good movie. I enjoyed that.
That was not bad.
Yeah, it wasn't bad. And technically unrealistic, but also just like cool in the sense that sometimes your knowledge of your anatomy and like practicality in an emergency situation is going to be a lot different than, you know, if you have all the tools available.
Right.
But,
Right,
yeah.
right. Different from the textbook, but no, I like that. I like the suturing thing. To me, is the self suturing thing is a classic also like instance of people being resourceful and gritty. It's like a character. It's immediately like a character trait. Well, if they can do that,
Yeah.
that means they're pretty tough, or you know they can get through the next series of challenges that the movie's going to throw at them.
It's also visceral for people too, because it's one of the things that I think you see a lot with like trauma and stuff is where, you know, we all know what it feels like to accidentally cut yourself on something. Not a lot of people know what it feels like to be shot. So I feel like that has more of like a reaction for an audience, like, you know, lacerations and cuts with lots of blood and like tissue in that way versus, you know, being shot. It's not that you don't like feel sympathy for the person being shot, but you have a more visceral empathy for somebody that's been cut versus
Because you've experienced it yourself, you know what that's like. Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point.
That's a great point.
I'm gonna throw out to me a one of my favorite self-surgery scenes and one of my least favorite. So I'll start with my least favorite. None of you guys ever saw this movie. It was the first movie of Darren Aronofsky that I saw called Pi.
Oh yeah.
And I think it was about a finance wizard who, you know, is, I don't recall a lot about, again, my apologies about the details of it, but he begins to see certain patterns in numbers that ultimately are driving him nuts. And so his solution at the end, and Aronofsky is to me notorious for this, is that the guy takes a drill and just takes a drill right to his temporal, you know, right to the through the temporal bone, through the scalp, just like let's just get that, let's just take care of things right away. So not even prepping the skin or give me an incision or just clean that up a little.
Just go
bit.
right in there.
Go right through the scalp. And I think he did it also in Requiem for a Dream, where Jared Leto's arm gets, and it's the same thing. It's a saw directly on the skin. So I put that in the category of bad self-surgery.
Yeah, just like there's like a huge, like antiseptic is a. I don't think any person, even if like, you know, you don't have the proper tools, you're also gonna try as hard as you can to get that as sterile as you possibly can if you're gonna bother to do something like that, you know. So
Yeah.
By the way, my apologies to the two of you for taking whatever proportion of listeners were listening and compressing that to.
Hey, we're all about getting true fans.
Dude, I do that
If
all
you're
the
listening,
time by
you're a
accident.
true fan.
So.
No,
Exactly. Think about it.
it's good. I mean, we don't have conventional guests on the show,
I don't
so,
think so.
you know, we're
Look at that. That's why I'm here.
well. Hey, you know, it's.
Exhibit A.
I think it's well, number one, you are an artist as well, so you know you are a storyteller, and we are hopefully in the next year and a half or so. Hopefully, you'll be back on talking about the premiere of your show.
Yes.
You know, and I think that's going to be a wonderful moment. Can I give my favorite?
Yes.
And
Yes,
also
please.
least favorite? It's the same, but I forget the exact name of the film, but it's the James Franco 147 Hours.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Where he gets his
Yes,
arm
yes.
caught. I thought that the way that they presented it with the flashes when he hits nerves,
Yes.
Yeah.
that was visceral.
The sound of it as it went through, and you're right. There was like that within the arm view of it, and it was it was a bit expressionistic, but it was perfectly done. And I know a lot of people who, even though it wasn't like super gross, because it certainly wasn't. the way they rendered it.
Yeah.
But they found they were incredibly sickened just by the sounds, as you said, in the flesh. Like it was much more powerful that way, based on how they did it. But I agree with you. I didn't even think about that one in my little list that was in my head just before. But that's a great one.
But I mean, I think it goes to show that you can take some artistic liberties there and present something and render it, as you said, in such a way that is quite visceral. So, if you have a character that's doing something, I would say, play around with that a little bit and don't be afraid to do something that is, kind of like, this is my story. This is the story doesn't exist except for me. So I'm going to do what I want to do, and make it memorable. I think that's the key. So, good stuff.
Yeah, I'll just give you my favorite self-surgery scene, and then we'll be done with this ghastly detour. Again, my apologies.
No, this is good.
I love this stuff. I'm sorry.
This is
I'm
good.
broken, dude.
I thought.
Listen, you start talking about bodies and stuff, Jesse comes out of her shell.
A receptive audience on this one, but
there you go.
So in there's a movie a few years ago called Ronin with De Niro.
Yep.
And Jean Reno, and De Niro gets a bullet to the gut, and he has to talk Reno through the extraction.
Yes.
And it's a great scene because De Niro's sort of in a bed, but he's propped up, and he has to place the mirror sort of in his lower, I think whether it was right lower quadrant. I can't remember exactly where the bullet entered, but he talks him through taking the knife and opening. He has to open the wound more. He says, you got to go at right angles and just keep going, because otherwise he can't get the instrument in to extract the bullet. But kind of talks him through. It's very realistic by comparison to some of the expressionistic stuff we just said. Yes. And at the end he just passes out, but the bullet is out there. But I was like, now that's good. That's good doctoring there.
Yes.
Talking a guy who never did it through it, and to do it on yourself. So that to me is still my favorite.
Yeah. Oh, here's one. How about I was racking my brain about one, and it's actually a true story. And I'm completely going off of a very faded memory, but wasn't there an astronaut that had to perform surgery on herself to remove like an appendix or something? In space, or it was on
Antarctica.
Antarctica.
It was an actual story.
That's a real story.
It's a real story.
Was it an appendix or breast cancer? You're right. It was something where it was either a biopsy or something. You're right, that had to be done.
It was an appendix, I think, because it was a doctor. And the one that I'm thinking of right now is like the actual story. But he was the only physician. And he started getting that acute abdominal pain that he was like, shit, I have, appendicitis, and there's only one way out of appendicitis. So yeah, he had to perform surgery on himself to remove the appendix.
Nope.
Yeah.
I would be dead.
An appendectomy.
Yeah, that would be brutal. Oh my gosh.
And it's funny too, because you want to even if somebody is tough as nails enough to perform surgery on themselves, you also have to just remember that your body's going to have just responses to that stress that you may not even be in control over. So it's the whole passing out thing, that might happen whether you want it to or not. And then I guess just, wake up, keep going.
Right.
Where was I? Shit.
You lose a little more blood than you think you're going to lose. That's going to, that is all of a sudden the situation's out of your control. So you're right. There are a lot of ways of that not working, unless you have that kind of contained surgery unit, like in Prometheus, where
yes,
Naomi Rapace doesn't she deliver a baby and then gets stapled, the baby's delivered through C-section. They staple immediately, and then she's running around for the rest of the movie, with a fresh lower abdominal incision. Pretty awesome. But at least she was helped out by the technology.
Yeah,
that's different.
Yeah, because I think even your response to pain too. I think some people, especially with adrenaline being involved, I think you can push past pain in a lot of ways. It's just you may be having other like physiological responses that you're not even aware of that you're having.
Your hand's going to start to shake.
Or like, what is it? Like women that lift cars like off their kids. Like they were totally capable of that within the moment. And the next day they're like, damn, it feels like someone hit me with a truck.
Oh, yeah.
You know? So
like, why are both my biceps torn off the bone? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Why is everything dislocated?
Right. Yeah. It's pretty crazy. I mean, I guess all the, superhero stories are grounded in some sort of, obviously very loose, but some sort of reality where people can exhibit superhuman strength or the ability to potentially read someone's mind or, not fly yet, but that one's a little out there. But it's
you wonder like
incredible.
if there are other science fiction stories of in extreme stress certain abilities are manifest. That there was a science fiction novel years ago called "The Star's My Destination" by Alfred Bester, and the idea was that we had the ability to teleport, but that it had to be exhibited only in times of extreme stress. So it happened kind of spontaneously, and then to test it or to make it reproducible or to really work it out, they would just put people in these chambers, fill them with water, and those that that could teleport lived, and those that didn't died. But it was the idea of like a near-death experience manifesting some crazy ability. I think it's pretty. That seems pretty right on,
Yeah.
As brutal as it is, but it's a cool idea.
Oh, for sure. Have you ever seen The OA? That was like a Netflix show. I'm a huge Britt Marling fan.
I am too.
She's great. Really fantastic. But I thought the concept.
What do you think of the way that show ended and all that? I mean, did you love it all the way through, or were there?
Yeah, I mean that the first season, the way that it ended with the first season, I thought that there was something about the whole dancing thing and having people come together and do something, and it was so intentional. It actually got me, like it really did. I felt that. It was something, I don't know. I was very invested in that show because I really enjoyed the concept of it. And
they packed a lot of different concepts in that show. It was pretty amazing. So I find her pretty compelling too. And I imagine her and whoever her creative partner is, I don't remember the name of the gentleman, but it seems that I think they did Another Earth.
Yeah, they did.
Right. So there were a couple other things, but I imagine this was years of, here's a story, but here's something else we like, and they kind of overlaid all these different things together. It was a jam-packed thing, but I'd love to meet those people.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, they're
very smart,
and they seem like very, very nice people too. So those are my favorite.
There was actually something on your podcast actually that just got me because I was listening to it on the way here. Was listening to some of the nurses speak.
Yes.
And like, and speaking of some of the, I think you even brought it up with Rick and Morty, like the nihilism. So like, there's that scene, and sometimes like it's just, I don't know if you've seen the one where he turns himself into a pickle.
Yes.
Pickle Rick.
So he just like lambasts this therapist, right? And in some ways, and here's the thing, I have like immense amounts of respect for therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists. I've gone to them myself. But I think sometimes, especially when it comes to just like the nihilism and like this really, in my opinion, somewhat toxic environment we've created with like this whole self-love thing, I think I think there's a healthy amount of self-love and respect. Then I think we're going a little bit further, like a little bit more into narcissism and kind of concerning, especially with like all the social media shit. So it's just that scene where he just kind of,
it's reinforcing, it's self-fulfilling.
Yeah. So he kind of lays into the therapist. And then one of the nurses on your show is actually saying, that whole, like, she went to somebody for help because she's dealing with all this like on the job stress. And that person's response was to just be like, well, leave. And it's just like, thank you. thank you so much, because that's a solution to some people.
Yeah.
It's not a solution to other people. And it's just like, it's that way in relationships too. It's just like, oh, that person's not making you happy. Well, fuck them. And it's just like, not everybody thinks like that.
And you saw, she was like, well, that was the last time.
And I was just like, that's, and I hope it's not the last time she went to a therapist, but you know, I mean, certainly, yes, I don't think she should have gone back to that person, because that's so dismissive. And it's just so, well, only care about yourself, fuck everybody else. And again, there's a certain amount of self-love and self-respect that you need, but at the same time, it's just like, not everybody's first response is just fuck everybody else. You know what I mean? So it's just, that one got me a little bit. I was like, that's...
Yeah, no, and other people have said the same. Like, you know, we had 2 nurses and we were focusing on nurses for that episode. And one more senior, you know, both in the ICU, so both in these really difficult, you know, challenging environments. But the more senior one has a different perspective. She's done other things before in her life. Somehow, you know, it obviously affects her to the core, but she has other ways of coping, or at least outwardly does so. But you know, the younger nurse, you could just hear in her voice, like, you know, when she says, you know, I'm crying in the break room because I'm, you know, day after day, I'm seeing, you know, this, you know, these young people dying. And how can you not feel for that? And also, how can you not worry that not only will this individual maybe, you know, may not be able to continue in her career ultimately, but that lots of smart people who could be going into nursing or into you know, into medicine might be thinking twice based on you know, those challenges. But yeah, there's nothing like hearing it from the people that are going through it, and anybody that thinks, you know, this isn't a real thing, or it's overblown, or the news, you know, you just gotta listen to the reality. And it's shocking to me how people have these very kind of altered realities in a way, and not a good way, not in a fictional world that's compelling, but in a very toxic sort of silo that you can't break out of.
Right.
It's crazy that
it's just like,
this is how we are. Yeah.
It's just so crazy to me that's like, and I can't tell again if it's just dismissive or if it just is that easy for some people, like, just quit.
Right.
It's just, I don't understand.
Who has that luxury?
Or not even the luxury, but just like, even like just like, sure, just abandon your coworkers and
and everything that you've worked for in your education and, you know, and what you want to do. Well, yeah, sure, that's great. That's very I appreciate your astute clinical insight there. Thank you.
Oh yeah.
And then goodbye. No, I'm talking to, you know, as that therapist.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah. Exactly. Like,
Sheesh.
Yeah. And even like I said, even in the relationship aspect, where it's just like, oh, you've been with somebody for over 10 years, they're not making you happy. Well, I mean, just leave.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like a little more difficult than that.
Yeah, sure. I'll just bail. And I'm excluding abuse from that particular, like, you know, of course, if you're in an abusive relationship, please, like, that's a very different thing than just 2 people that love each other that are super different and trying to find, you know, common ground
trying
somewhere.
to work it out. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. What, the third part of your life being the podcast, obviously, so in the podcast you talk about you were already in pre-production for I guess, was it a different concept of a show, or was
we were going to so this was so prior to the, you know, the early part of 2020 and the pandemic hitting, it was a, you know, straight up journalistic documentary series, but there was going to be a lot more on location, you know, recordings and interviews. So the idea of I could bring somebody into the operating room or, you know, for example, if one of my colleagues was operating, we would be able to kind of narrate the procedure, and, you know, have people have that feeling of being there. But the idea that there would have been a, you know, production team at this hospital or this office or this ER, et cetera, that all went away because nobody was letting anyone into any you know, any hospital in you know, in the United States, or it's particularly in the Northeast during that period of time,
especially New York.
So we had to, kind of adjust it, but it's working out in a very interesting way where I'm getting more and more, doctor and nurse correspondents who are sending me their journals. So like, I have a doctor who does house calls in East Harlem.
Wow.
And as she's walking up into the projects and into the elevator, she's telling me what, here's a patient, here's what we're going to talk about. Here's the story. I've known this patient for 10 years. Sometimes we actually hear from the patient itself, and then afterwards you hear, what happened and what's next and what the challenges are, and does that person have to go to the hospital? They don't want to go to the hospital. What are the family dynamics? All that stuff. Wow. And we can repeat this kind of way of doing it with people talking about cases in the emergency room or trauma cases. We can talk about, various operations, complex stuff, or just dramatic stories and all that. So we were able to kind of pivot and use remote journals and people being able to talk into basic, good voice recorder apps that give us some good, sound quality and good ability to do some post-production. And that then becomes the building blocks for the, for the podcast. And the more doctors and nurses I can get involved, and I'm pretty now kind of committed to really expanding the team, it'll be like a real snapshot at any period in time of here's what's going on now. Here's what's going on Friday night at 10 p.m. across the country in ERs or in the operating room, and here's an emergency, and here's something else that's been a chronic thing that just anything like that. And the more people, it's amazing how good most of these doctors and nurses are at telling these stories.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't yet found someone that can't do it. Some people, I would say, really perhaps are not suited to like broadcasting in that way, or don't want to, kind of share that, or are more introverted. But even those people, if you start talking to them, or if I'm interviewing them, there's definitely, there's always a interesting or compelling angle or story to it. It just some of it is just helping them kind of tell it and teasing it out a little bit. Sometimes it takes a little much to kind of prime the pump, but once they get going, they're all pretty good.
That's amazing. I mean, knowing that some of the folks that you featured on the podcast, I mean, they were emotional, talking, and I guess they're talking into a recorder, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's pretty incredible,
Yeah. They have, you can get even on your phone on the on the lightning connector. There's like little mini Shure mics that are like little podcast mics that give you a little bit better quality. But even just your regular microphone on your phone, if you're holding it at the right distance from your mouth, you're gonna do pretty well. You don't want to be too close. You don't want to pop it, not too far away. Yeah. But you're right. A lot of it can come out that way. And sometimes that's good just because I don't want people to have to think about it too much. I want press a button, to tell me what's on your mind, and then, send it off. Don't edit yourself. Don't think about, how do I sound and all that, because, we're committed to making people, to telling their stories in a respectful, captivating, and also kind of like coherent way. So even if one might be off there, with a little bit of editing, you can compress the story to something that's really on target. And people thus far, I think, have been pretty happy about that. But I really would love to increase it's all about volume. So the more people involved and the more it can get out there, I think the better it's going to be. And it's not for doctors. I mean, I'm not doing this so that other doctors can hear it. If they're interested, that's great. It's for people that don't have any medical background. Just have, you have an understanding of that life. But, I'm looking for people who, maybe didn't have that interest before, but just want to hear a compelling story, or want to understand a little bit more about what's going on in that world. Because it's a world that's both familiar and foreign to most people.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like, especially in today's world, how divided, a lot of things are, and people are questioning whether, doctors and even our best doctors are telling the truth about things. And it's just like, I'm not a doctor, and I don't have any, I tend to want to believe when people are getting emotional talking about, the severity of something. I can recognize the sincerity in their words and kind of deduce for myself that, this is something that we should probably be, at least cognizant of, regarding the pandemic and all that. But, it's, I think what you're doing is really cool. So definitely, I really hope that you can get more episodes out there. I know it's difficult. It's really well produced, so that takes a lot of time, I'm sure.
It does, yeah. That is the challenge, and my production partner Des Stewart is very good at this stuff. Yeah. Particularly, and we're given the resources we have, we're making it sound as much like $1 million as we can. Yeah. And that's right. That's not an easy thing.
Right. Yep. It is not. Well, cool. Well, listen, Peter, this has been really enjoyable. This has been really nice.
I really like hanging out with you guys.
Likewise.
It's been a good time.
For the listeners out there, Archetype Pictures and in particular Michael and Peter are working on a screenplay right now.
Great Mike Ryan. I know everybody knows who you're referring to with Michael, but Michael Ryan. Yeah. If you haven't heard of him, you will. The next few years will be the years of Ryan. Yes. I assure you.
I agree.
If I have anything to do with it.
Right. No, I mean we have a pretty strong slate of a few absolutely incredible projects that I'm very excited about. So I'm just very proud to be part of Archetype Pictures at this time. So
ditto.
I'm very excited to hear the announcement of your first casting of Dresden's Son. I know it's all under wraps.
Yep.
You're in an
you can't say anything.
Location. Can't talk about
I
this,
will edit it out.
No,
we are currently in long form discussions at the moment.
Yeah, that's a nice way to put it.
Yep, there you go. With our first attachment. Yeah, so once we get a little bit more down the road on that, we'll be for sure making an announcement. But
and then the dominoes will fall in rapid succession.
Yes, yeah. I'm really hoping so. It's been even just to get to this point, it's been such a long journey over the last couple months trying to lock somebody in. It's I think a good sign actually, because I do believe it's evidence of the industry opening back up, and a lot of people are submitting offers to these actors. And, everybody's trying to get back to work all at once. So we had to kind of wait our turn in line.
And you're right. You couldn't have done, even though, you're right now, there's more competition because, people are kind of getting back to it and there's probably a backlog. 6 months ago, you wouldn't be able to, you might be able to tender these offers, but you wouldn't be able to do anything about it. So
yeah, exactly.
Everybody's in the same boat. You're in the same position.
Yeah. And this film would not work in a socially distanced manner. It'd be very, very expensive. Right. So we had to wait until it was safe and everybody's vaccinated on our team to be able to move forward with it. So I'm stoked. I'm really excited. But so for the listeners out there, Peter's graphic novel, The Adjacent, is available on Comixology, which is an Amazon website. His podcast is The Life Medical, which is on Apple Podcasts. And hopefully we never have to see you, in your day job.
On my day job.
But I would encourage everybody to go and check out the other stuff. So
thank you so much.
You got it, man. It was great talking to you. You got it. Have a great night.